I'm Slava Zilber. Welcome to Conversations with Slava. Today, I'm talking to Fischer, an independent videographer, editor, and computer scientist web designer, co-founder and designer of the website News2Share.com. Ford, please explain what has happened to your Facebook account. Have you had similar experiences before?
Right. So my outlet is called News2Share, and basically what I do is I live stream situations mostly related to activism and sort of domestic unrest in the United States. And so on that on that platform, I do live streams, and then after the end of a situation, I post sort of HD video summarizing that situation. But people can still go back and reference the live stream to see the context of every shot. And that's sort of my way of kind of differentiating myself from the mainstream media and creating kind of an alternative. In terms of what happened this weekend, I was covering a day of activism taking place in Louisville, Kentucky, which is where the Kentucky Derby, to those who don't know, this is a big annual horse race event that goes on, not a particularly political event. But that was going on Saturday. And a number of activist groups were using that situation as sort of a platform or a setting for their activism. It's also the city that Breonna Taylor was killed, who is a woman who was killed when police basically raided the wrong house in a no-knock raid, and her boyfriend confronted the police officers. Ultimately, charges were dropped against him because it seems that the raid was erroneous. But she died, and so far, police haven't been charged. In any event, that city has become sort of a centerpiece of activism related to that subject. And so on Saturday, I was live streaming as right-wing militia groups entered the city and were confronted by anti-fascists and anti-racists who were, both sides being armed. And then later in the afternoon, an all-black militia called the NFAC, the Not Effing Around Coalition, was also marching, and they marched to Churchill Downs, which is the site of the Kentucky Derby itself. At some point in the afternoon, my Facebook was completely eliminated, and there was no notification of any sort. What happened was that once I was finished live streaming, I use a third-party app called Boxcast that allows me to live stream to both Twitter and Facebook simultaneously. And so the live stream continued to work properly on Twitter, and theoretically it should have been working on Facebook. But when I finished my broadcast, somebody had messaged me on Twitter saying, "What happened to your Facebook?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know." So I opened the Facebook app and it said, "Your account has been disabled." Basically, without any kind of notification, it seems that my entire Facebook was taken down permanently. So obviously this was sort of devastating, and I posted a screenshot of that and then some details to Twitter and sort of made a viral Twitter thread explaining what had happened. I think some important context for this is that in the last few weeks, Facebook has been especially sensitive about militia groups, armed activists organizing on their website, and they have made strides to remove people who participate in militias and militia organizations themselves from the platform altogether. So although it was never confirmed to me because there was no notification of any kind, I suspect that they took down my page because I was basically talking about the subject of people with guns doing activism. I was talking about militias. I was live streaming them, filming them, photographing them that day. And to an untrained computer, to an algorithm that makes decisions about removing people's content, it seems like either a computer or some human being who didn't put in any effort to really understand what I was, deleted my entire account. My last Facebook post before that happened was actually I was still on field, but I had taken a photograph of a moment in which someone pointed a handgun at another person. It was sort of, it happened inadvertently. A person was holding a handgun kind of irresponsibly. They unholstered it. And then while in the process of taking it from pointing down to pointing up, they had it pointed straight at another person. And so I took a picture of that picture, right? From my iPhone, I took a picture of the DSLR where I had the photo and then posted it online saying, so far there hasn't been much violence today, but this is how people die. People were handling firearms really irresponsibly. it was clearly a condemnation of gun violence, of gun irresponsibility. It wasn't me endorsing anything about that sort of action. But given that that was my last post before it was taken down, I assume that Facebook looks at that post, sees a picture of someone pointing a gun at another person, and then it doesn't differentiate between endorsing it and covering it in my capacity as a journalist. To answer your other question about has this happened before, I did have one situation in which a website called Reclaim the Net had written about how I was demonetized on YouTube a year ago. And when I posted an article written by them about me being censored on YouTube to Facebook, I actually was banned for 2.5 days from posting on Facebook. And it happened instantaneously. It wasn't like it wasn't like someone reported it somehow. It was literally, I posted the link and then it immediately said you've been banned for posting for 2.5 days, or I think it was 60 hours. So it has happened once before that Facebook sort of suspended me from posting, but never to the extent that we have there, which is an outright deletion without any kind of notification. Twitter has never particularly done anything censorious to me that I'm aware of, but I was sort of, a controversial situation happened with me a year ago, which was that in June of 2019, YouTube broadened its sort of definitions of what it considered unsafe content, and they demonetized my entire YouTube channel. And so from June until January, I was totally demonetized, and I at least once a week basically complained about it in some form or another on Twitter toward Team YouTube. And ultimately, they admitted that was a mistake and also fixed it. So with respect to yesterday, my Facebook was restored basically inexplicably in the afternoon. So it was down for about 24 hours, but it theoretically was expected to be down forever. And again, there was actually no notification. It just came back as if it was never gone. And so I think that's really alarming, because I think that people who have their content taken down or are outright deleted by these platforms, at the absolute bare minimum, they should be entitled to an explanation. We're taking you down because, we believe that you're involved in unsafe activities. We believe that you're committing crimes. We believe that you're committing hate speech. Whatever it is, if there's going to be a policy and its enforcement includes, suppressing, deleting, removing, censoring, whatever, I think people should be entitled to a human being informing them. And I think that if that burden was even there, I doubt it would have happened to me, because somebody who would have had to actually write an explanation would have had to say, we saw that in your journal, as a journalist, you took a photo of gun violence and then we wanted to take that down. Oh, wait, actually, that doesn't make sense. So I guess that would be my demand, but I think that it would probably cut into the bottom line. They'd probably have to hire more people and less robots.
And how should these people operate if you had the power to design this system for Facebook, for Twitter? What guidelines would you institute?
Right. So sort of like I was alluding to, I think that there are probably people smarter than me who could describe what the rules should be, what you're allowed to post or do on Facebook. I think that there are people can argue in good faith multiple different positions on, for example, whether people should have sort of the right to organize meetups on Facebook that are going to involve, certain political ideologies or, the presence of firearms. I can empathize with why Facebook feels uncomfortable with that. With that being said, I think that one thing that should be imperative, and I can't really imagine any reason other than a profit margin that anybody would disagree with this, is I think that people should be entitled to know the specifics of what they are being, put down for, right? If someone is getting suspended from being able to post, if somebody's individual post is being taken down, if somebody's account is being terminated, I think people should be entitled to an explanation. It shouldn't just sort of happen as if the person never existed. They just vanish and they're told nothing about why. I think another really standard baseline is that in the event that somebody loses an account or something, people should probably be entitled to their data, right? One concern that I had yesterday and the day before, as my content was down, and I didn't know would I ever get my Facebook back, is, I had been posting on the same Facebook account since high school, right? I'm 26 now, but my graduation photos, family photos, photos with grandparents, some of which are not alive anymore, that sort of thing, are on Facebook. And I think that if somebody is going to be removed from it, they should be, it's their data and they should be entitled to get it back. And so that was something I was really worried about, is sort of never being able to get those sorts of priceless kind of like memories back. So, I mean, those would be some bare minimum requirements that I wish that they could follow. And again, I think the only reason that they don't have human reviewers or human beings typing out explanations of takedowns is because it would take time. It would take more labor. But if you can have a robot censor people, it's going to cost a heck of a lot less, because a robot can decide in a microsecond, that you said the wrong thing.
You addressed your assumptions why they have removed your account. Do you think it was in a way political? I spoke to Ricardo Vaz of the independent website Venezuelanalysis over a week ago, and their account was removed from Twitter and then reinstated very recently. And they are critical of the opposition and less critical sometimes of Nicolas Maduro. And he believed that it is at least partly political.
Right. I think that to say that it's political is probably true, but I think that there's a trap that a lot of people fall into when discussing this issue. And that trap is that I think people tend to assume that there's a political, straightforward left-right bias. And so I will often see that people on the right, especially in the MAGA movement, and Donald Trump Jr. speaks about this a lot, is the idea that Trump supporters or just right-wingers are being censored. However, Facebook also takes down pages belonging to communists, to anti-fascists. In 2018, there was an enormous purge that primarily targeted anti-war, websites critical of American foreign policy, as well as critical of the drug war. Websites and pages that were talking about legalizing cannabis, legalizing psychedelic mushrooms, and so forth. And so those topics, while not explicitly leftist, would probably be more aligned with the left. I guess my point is that in my experience, from what I've seen go down on Facebook and generally on social media, it's sort of my position that it seems like, although takedowns can be political, it's not so much about left versus right. It's more about like what is sort of within the Overton window, what's like acceptable or like normal. And so, while a Democrat may likely not have mainstream Democratic positions censored by Facebook, somebody expressing sympathies to Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, it would not surprise me that that person would be removed or censored on social media. The same way as I think that we generally know that, on the right, someone is probably not being censored for advocating, lower taxes, but somebody with extreme right-wing views on immigration, for example, may well find themselves banned from social media. So again, I don't want to imply any kind of equivalence between the far left and the far right. But in terms of social media, it seems to me that it's pretty indiscriminatory in terms of the manner in which Facebook is taking down anybody kind of talking about things outside of the mainstream. This affects someone like me quite directly because I don't consider my work to be left or right at all, but I document, activism, which as a tactic tends to be people who are on the more extreme side, especially those who would come out armed, right? So I spend a lot of time filming armed anarchists, armed communists, armed socialists, armed far-right individuals, right? all of these different types of groups that very much fall outside of the mainstream. And that seems to be what Facebook is, bothered by. So on Saturday, at the exact moment that I was taken down, I was live streaming the NFAC, which is basically a Black nationalist militia. And earlier in the day, I had filmed confrontations between a far-right militia and, presumably far-left people on the other side, anti-fascists, anti-racists, who would probably identify as socialists or communists, but again, were also armed. So I don't know which individual one of those things, or if any single one of those things was the actual reason that I went down, because I was notified and because I wasn't notified, and I'll never know. But a hodgepodge of various extremes carrying guns, and something among that seems to have been the reason.